Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some PathOfExile 1 discussion. Today, let's talk about some of the things that have been going on in PathOfExile 1's Trade League economy in Mercenaries Softcore. This has been an interesting weekend. And when I say interesting, it's been a pretty wild ride for people that have been sitting on Chaos Orbs or Divine Orbs, which is probably most of you. Let's have a look at the exchange rate, shall we? You'll see that it's currently something like 240 to 1. This was very, very different just a couple of days ago. A couple of days ago, I was regularly selling Divine Orbs for 152, 156, 162 Chaos. Then last night my time, something like 12 hours before I'm recording this video, I needed a bunch of Chaos Orbs and I was able to buy 5,000 of them for just 21 Divine Orbs. There's definitely been a big shift that's gone on and it's been sustained. So I want to talk about where that's coming from and also what I think the future is likely to hold. But firstly, let's just start with the facts of the matter before we get into anything that's more opinion-based. As you can see, the current fair market value for a Divine Orb is something like 240 Chaos Orbs. But what happens when we look at some other commodities that get traded quite a bit and that are fairly valuable? So let's start with the Echo of Reverence, shall we? This is one of the new entry tokens for one of the Pinnacle bosses. This is currently going for 550-ish Chaos Orbs, and the exact amount does vary, but it's in that sort of broad ballpark amount. Syndicate Medallion, aka the Katarina Access token, this one has actually gone up even against the Divine Orb, but it's gone up even more against the Chaos Orb, but the Echo of Reverence has stayed roughly the same against the Divine Orb. And as I tried to check a bunch of other different sorts of commodities that people trade a lot, it turned out that most of them were still trading in roughly the same ratios against the Divine Orbs that they previously did. It's just that they're now trading for more Chaos Orbs than they used to do. So my first conclusion in this video is going to be that it is the Chaos Orb falling in value, it is not the Divine Orb rising in value. Divine Orbs aren't purchasing more than they did a couple of days ago. In fact, in some cases they're purchasing less, like the Syndicate Medallion, like against the Mirror Shard, but it's more the case that people are just losing interest in trading into Chaos Orbs. Why is that? Here we get into a bit more speculation, but I do think there's a bit of evidence for what I'm going to say. So have a look at Morbid Mire here. This is a fortress map that I think many players would elect to roll over. It has rare monsters have volatile cores. This modifier is horrifyingly dangerous. It has a few other things on it that are fairly mean. Monsters gain 48% of extra life as maximum energy shield. This can be particularly obnoxious with a map boss like Fortress Map Boss that has a lot of hit points. And then it's got a few other things on it that just might interfere with your build in certain ways. I would say that a fair number of players are going to look at this and say, nah, I'm rolling over this. How do you roll over this? Well, you've only got one real choice, and that is the Chaos Orb. Contrast this to the new tier 16.5 / Zana influence / Gommage influence, whatever you want to call these maps. These maps do not require Chaos Orbs to re-roll. They're also allowed to be 4 modifiers, which makes them less likely to be nasty than tier 17 mods. Now, the key thing that's changed is that there's been a number of strategies published over the last weekend that abandon tier 17s in favor of Gommage influence maps. And what this is meaning is that there's more and more players that are jumping ship from 17s into 16.5s. What are these players doing with Chaos Orbs now? Well, they're not using as many of them as they were before. So essentially, top-end players are deleting less Chaos Orbs than they were in the past. There are, however, a few things Chaos Orbs can be used for that are not related to rolling maps. The first one of them is, of course, Zana's mods, or the map device mods, or Kirac mods, whatever you want to call them now that the endgame has all changed. In particular, there's the heist one, which is probably the one that has the highest value, but that's kind of its own entire strategy. There's a small section of the player base that do this, but a lot of people just aren't interested in it. Otherwise, though, a lot of these don't actually do anything all that useful. Prior to patch 3.20, it was impossible to get a 100% chance to get the Delirium Mirror on the passive tree. So if you wanted to get the Delirium Mirror, you had two choices. You could either use the map device in order to force Delirium on, or you could spec into a percentage chance to get the Delirium Mirror. Now you have the option of a baseline Delirium Scarab if you want to use it. You've got the option of using the map device mod, or you've got the option of just speccing about 20 points in order to get 100% Delirium chance in every single map. What this means is that there's just a lot less utility for many of these map device mods. Now the ones that stack, for instance, Anarchy, this just adds 7 additional rogue exiles. Whether you've got exiles there or not already, this just adds 7 more of them, and so that ends up being pretty good to use, even if you're already running a rogue exile strategy. In fact, especially if you're already running one. There are certainly some that are like that, but for a lot of them, it is just binary, and those ones essentially aren't useful at all. Except maybe for the newest of players that just want to try out a strategy before they commit to setting up an atlas around it. So, the map device is using less Chaos Orbs than it did in PathOfExile's history. The second thing is that for most item slots that your character can equip, using Chaos Orbs to roll them is pretty terrible. Now this isn't true for jewels, and it's not true for some cluster jewels. There are some situations in which directly applying Chaos Orbs to gear is a reasonable use. However, these are pretty rare, and most of the time, people aren't using large amounts of Chaos Orbs in this way. And then there's a few things you can do with them, like you can come to Kirac, you can go to his purchase screen and you can go, oh, do you have any Chisels for me? And usually he does. But these are just not very explosive amounts of currency, and most players just aren't interested in bothering with them. Essentially, there's nothing that's really sinking an enormous amount of Chaos Orbs out of the Trade League economy. There are definitely some sinks, but they have decreased because the most significant one of them was Tier 17 maps. So what's the evidence for this claim? It's a collapse in price of Tier 17 maps that took place at about the same time as the surge in the value of the Divine Orb against Chaos Orb, which is over the last weekend. There are now more people looting Tier 17s and not looking to run them themselves than there were before. There are fewer people running Tier 17s and not looting any than there were before. Consequence of these things is that there's just more of a build-up of Tier 17s available in trade, and when there's more supply and less demand, you end up in a situation where prices tend to go down. So that's the reasons for the changes with the Divine Orb and the Chaos Orb. Will this continue from here? I don't think we're going to see a repeat of what we've seen in PathOfExile 2 with the Exalted Orb, where the Exalted Orb has just ceased to be a relevant currency. A lot of people don't pick them up at all anymore. I think instead we're going to see that the Chaos Orb is going to continue to be picked up by most players because there are still some of these scalable sinks. You can just simply start using more Chaos Orbs if you have more. But I wouldn't be surprised if we do see a little bit further on this trend of, from 240, maybe it'll go a little bit further before we start seeing more of an uptick in use of some of those Chaos sinks that do exist in game. Most notably, that comes down to the fact that applying Chaos Orbs to items is just not a very good Chaos sink. It deletes the Chaos Orb, it just doesn't produce very many usable items compared to all the other crafting tools that we've got in this game. One thing that I think will be interesting will be watching to see how this develops over the rest of the league. Will it be the case that Chaos Orbs continue to fall, or will a new floor be found under them? And if so, what's going to underpin that? There are two more factors I want to discuss, one of which I agree is a factor in the Divine Orb increasing in price, but don't agree that it's a reason that it's increased over the last weekend, and that's the Sanctum nerfs. The second factor is the question of organized cartels of traders, and whether they've had a big role to play in this change in the Divine Orb ratio. That time, I'm going to argue that it's not really the case. So, let's start out with the Sanctum one, that'll be the less controversial side. Firstly, the Sanctum nerfs were something that took place at the start of the league. They're pretty well known now. Basically, Sanctum awards considerably fewer raw Divine Orbs than it used to. And on top of that, there's also a divination card for one of the jackpot drops that used to be sort of a bit of a pull into Sanctum. You'd be thinking, oh, maybe I'll get an original Sin relic, and if I do, I'm set for the rest of the league. That was something a number of people thought when they were thinking about playing Sanctum in the past, and this league, of course, there's a divination card for that, so people are expecting that the O-Sin relic will be worth less as well. So Sanctum lost the steady income of Divine Orbs, a little bit of it, and also lost some of those jackpot drops, and consequentially, there are fewer people playing the Sanctum, and each one of them is generating fewer Divine Orbs. This is tightening the supply of Divine Orbs across the entire league. However, this is not really a factor in why the increase has happened in the last few days. This is the sort of thing where maybe if the Sanctum nerfs hadn't happened, maybe it would have been at 140 until a few days ago, maybe it'd be at 220 now instead of 240, but the same sort of general trajectory would have happened. The second question is that of trade cartels. And ultimately, the reason I don't buy it is because if you did have a big trade cartel, there's too much incentive for each individual person in it to mess with the other people in the cartel. So let's say that you're someone that plays the Trade League economy like a PvP game. You're someone that's accumulated 16 mirrors so far in this league, and you get together with a bunch of other people that have all got similar sorts of amounts of capital to you. And you come to an agreement. At 9 o'clock on Friday, you're all going to lower the value of the Chaos Orb. You're going to do it, and you're going to somehow all profit from doing so. So, this is your plan. What's your immediate best move? Your immediate best move is actually to move at 8 o'clock instead of 9 o'clock. And this is the case for everyone else in the entire cartel. Essentially, it's kind of an unstable agreement. Everyone benefits from backstabbing each other. And those sorts of agreements, when you're talking about the high end of a PvP setting like a Trade League economy, they are not ever stable. That's the reason that I don't buy that this is something that it's like an organized market collusion. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there. May your Chaos Orbs and your Divine Orbs have interesting results. And if you run any bargain tier 17 maps during this period, may they have interesting mods.